Hey Colts, it's Mrs. Hladun. I'm here to do a little reading from the book The Secret Garden. And we're about halfway through the book at this point, so we've got quite a bit more to go, but we're going to keep on keeping on. So we are on chapter number 15. It's called Nest Building. And in the last chapter, Mary, who's our main character, met another child who was living in the house that she was in, and his name is Colin. And Colin is the child of the man who owns the home, Mr. Craven. No, is it Mr. Craven? Oh my gosh, I forgot what his last name was. Anyways, so he's the son, and he's the same age as Mary, and everybody tells him he's going to die, and he decides that because everybody says he's going to die, they do whatever he wants. So he wants to be able to see Mary whenever he wants. So that's where we left off. So now we're on chapter 15. It's called Nest Building, and this is what the art looks on the top of the chapter. So my guess is that that's Mary, and that that's her with Colin because he's in a bed, and that's where he tends to stay, is in his house. So let's take a quick peek at this chapter. Oh yeah, I think we can totally read this. That'll be totally doable. All right, here we go. All right, and forgive me, this story is hard to read. The language is a little funky, so I don't feel like I do my best reading, but it'll be good enough. So here we go, Nest Building. After another week of rain, the high arc of blue sky appeared again, and the sun which poured down was quite hot. Though there had been no chance to see either the secret garden or Dickon, Mistress Mary had enjoyed herself very much. The week had not seemed long. She had spent hours of every day with Colin in his room, talking about Rajas or gardens or Dickon and the cottage on the moor. They had looked at the splendid books and pictures, and sometimes Mary had read things to Colin, and sometimes he read a little to her. When he was amused and interested, she thought he scarcely looked like an invalid at all, except that his face was so colorless, and he was always on the sofa. "You are a sly young one to listen and get out of your bed to go following things up like you did that night," Mrs. Medlock said once. "But there's no saying. It's not been a sort of blessing for the lot of us. He's not had a tantrum or a whining fit since you made friends. The nurse was just going to give up the case because she was so sick of him, but she says she doesn't mind staying now that you've gone on duty with her," laughing a little. In her talks with Colin, Mary had tried to be very cautious about the secret garden. There were certain things she wanted to find out from him, but she felt she must find them out without asking him direct questions. In the first place, she began to like to be with him. She wanted to discover whether he was the kind of boy you could tell a secret to. He was not at least like Dickon, but he was evidently so pleased with the idea of a garden no one knew anything about that she thought perhaps he could be trusted, but she had not known him long enough to be sure. The second thing she wanted to find out was this: if he could be trusted, if he really could, wouldn't it be possible to take him to the garden without having anyone find it out? The grand doctor had said that he must have fresh air, and Colin had said he wouldn't mind fresh air in a secret garden. Perhaps if he had a great deal of fresh air and knew Dickon and the robin and saw things growing, he might not think so much about dying. Mary had seen herself in the glass sometimes lately when she realized that she looked quite different creature from the child she had seen when she arrived from India. This child looked nicer. Even Martha had seen a change in her. "The air from the moor has done thee good already," she said. "The art night so yeller and the art night so scrawny. Even their hair doesn't slant down on the head so flat. It's got some life to it, so it sticks out a bit." "It's like me," said Mary. "It's growing stronger and fatter. I'm sure there's more of it." It looks it for sure," said Martha, ruffling it up a little round her face. "That's not half so ugly when it's that way, and they're a bit of red in the cheeks." If gardens and fresh air had been good for her, perhaps they would be good for Colin. But then, if he hated people to look at him, perhaps he would not like to see Dickon. "Why does it make you so angry when you were looked at?" she inquired one day. "I always hated it," he answered, "even when I was very little. Then when they took me to the seaside, I used to lie in my carriage, and everyone used to stare, and the ladies would stop and talk to my nurse, and they would begin to whisper, and I knew they were saying I shouldn't live to grow up. Then sometimes the ladies would pat my cheeks and say, 'Poor child.' Once when a lady did that, I screamed so loud and bit her hand. She was so frightened she ran away." "She thought you'd gone mad like a dog," said Mary, not at all admiringly. "I don't care what she thought," said Colin, frowning. "I wonder why you didn't scream and bite me when I came into your room," said Mary. Then she began to smile slowly. I thought you were a ghost or a dream, he said. You can't bite a ghost or a dream, and if you scream, they don't care. Would you hate it if a boy looked at you? Mary asked uncertainly. He lay back on his cushion and paused thoughtfully. There's one boy, he said, quite slowly, as if he were thinking over every word. There's one boy I believe I shouldn't mind. It's the boy who knows where the foxes live. Dickon? I'm sure you wouldn't mind him, said Mary. The birds don't, and the other animals, he said, still thinking it over. Perhaps that's why I shouldn't. He's a sort of animal charmer, and I am a boy animal. Then he laughed, and she laughed too. In fact, it ended in both their laughing a great deal and finding the idea of a boy animal hiding in a hole very funny indeed. What Mary felt afterwards was that she need not fear about Dickon. On that first morning when the sky was blue again, Mary wakened very early. The sun was pouring in slanting rays through the blinds, and there was something so joyous in the sight of it that she jumped out of bed and ran to the window. She drew up the blinds and opened the window itself, and a great waft of fresh, scented air blew in upon her. The moor was blue, and the whole world looked as if something magic had happened to it. There were tender little fluted sounds here and there and everywhere, as if scores of birds were beginning to tune up for a concert. Mary put her hand out the window and held it in the sun. It's warm, she said. It will make the green points push up and up and up, and it will make the bulbs and roots work and struggle with all their might under the earth. She kneeled down and leaned out of the window as far as she could, breathing big breaths and sniffing the air until she laughed, because she remembered what Dickon's mother had said about the end of his nose quivering like a little rabbit's. It must be very early, she said. The little clouds are all pink, and I've never seen the sky look like this. No one is up. I didn't even hear the stable boys. A sudden thought made her scramble to her feet. I can't wait. I'm going to go see the garden. She had learned to dress herself by this time, and she put on her clothes in 5 minutes. She knew a small side door which she could unbolt herself and flew downstairs in her stocking feet and put on her shoes in the hall. She unchained and unbolted and unlocked, and when the door was open, she sprang across the step with one bound, and there she was standing on the grass, which seemed to have turned green, with the sun pouring down on her and warm, sweet wafts about her, and the fluting and the twittering and singing coming from every bush and tree. She clasped her hands for pure joy and looked up in the sky, and it was so blue and pink and pearly and white and flooded with springtime light that she felt as if she must flute and sing aloud herself, and knew the thrushes and robins and skylarks could not possibly help it. She ran around the shrubs and paths towards the secret garden. It's all different already, she said. The grass is greener, and things are sticking up everywhere, and things are uncurling, and green buds of leaves are showing. This afternoon, I am sure Dickon will come. Hi, Ben, you going to come listen? Yes. Okay, you going to come sit next to me? All right. Here, I'm going to scoot over. Sorry, this is my little guy, Benjamin. Can you, make yourself visible for a second? It's okay that your hair is a little crazy. Everybody's hair is crazy. Here, this is my little Benjamin. Hi, Benjamin. Ben's in 4th grade, just like some of you, and he is ready for summer. Is that true, Ben? You ready for summertime?
Yes.
You ready for school to be over?
Yes.
Yeah. Have you been doing your best at school?
Yes.
What is your least favorite school activity to do?
Reading. I like the benchmark stuff.
Oh, he thinks they use benchmark in 4th grade, and that has been really tricky for Ben. It is really, really tricky.
It's easy. I just don't like doing it.
I think your least favorite thing to do starts with an I and ends with a ready.
Oh, I'm ready.
Oh my gosh, you guys. Benjamin does not like I ready. Is that true?
Yes.
Did I tell you that we have some students at our school that have done over 3,000 I ready minutes since school got out?
How many have I done?
Not 3,000. I don't know, but not 3,000.
How many?
I don't know.
Like how many?
Probably a few hundred at best.
Probably just like 1,000.
But he's done all of his other work, so that makes it okay. And then he and I do a lot of reading together when I'm reading my stories, which I really like. What's your favorite part about not going to school right now?
Playing a lot of video.
He is spending a lot of time playing video games. That is true. Do you miss your friends?
I mean, I talk to them.
And that's why he does it, is because he talks to his friends on the video games. And so that's what makes his life a little bit more reasonable, yeah? You gonna eat some pizza while I,
Yes.
Okay. So Ben's gonna sit here and read while I keep going, or he's gonna eat while I keep going. So here we go. This afternoon, I am sure Dickon will come. The long, warm rain had done strange things to the herbaceous beds which bordered the walk by the lower wall. There were things sprouting and pushing up from the roots of clumps of plants, and there were actually here and there glimpses of royal purple and yellow unfurling among the stems of crocuses. 6 months before Mistress Mary would have seen the world was waking up, but now she missed nothing. When she had reached the place where the door hid itself under the ivy, she was startled by a curious loud sound. It was the caw-caw of a crow, so like a caw-caw. And it came up from the top of the wall, and when she looked up, there sat a very big, glossy plumaged, blue-black bird, looking down at her very wisely indeed. Can you kind of sit still like eat, or don't like bounce around? Okay, thanks. Sorry, I'm trying to teach Ben some etiquette. If you're going to bounce around, you're going to have to leave, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. She had never seen a crow so close before. He made her a little nervous, but the next moment he spread his wings and flapped away across the garden. She hoped he was not going to stay inside, and she pushed the door open, wondering if he would. When she got fairly into the garden, she saw that he probably did intend to stay, because he had alighted on a dwarf apple tree, and under the apple tree was lying a little reddish animal with a bushy tail, and both of them were watching the stoopy body and rust-red hen of Dickon, who was kneeling on the grass working hard. Mary flew across the grass to him. "Oh, Dickon, Dickon," she cried out. "How could you get here so early? How could you? The sun has only just gotten up."
Is he dead?
No, Dickon is a boy. Okay, so think about it, friends. Think in your brain about who Dickon is. So Mary's our main character that's a girl, and Dickon is the son of the woman who cares for Mary. Sorry, not the son, the brother of the woman that cares for Mary, and he lives across the moor in a little cottage with like 12 brothers and sisters. But he and Mary have become friends, and he's really, really smart about plants and animals.
The guy's that's about to die.
Oh, his name is Colin, and he's not really about to die. He just thinks he is, and he is the son of the man that owns the house. So none of these people are related. Well, I guess Mary and Colin are related. They're like cousins. But Dickon's just a friend. Okay, here we go. We're going to keep on reading. Seeing him talking to a stranger, the bushy little-tailed animal rose from its place under the tree and came to him, and the rook, cawing once, flew down from its branch and settled quietly on his shoulder. "This is the little fox cub," he said, rubbing the little reddish animal's head. "Its name is Captain. And here's Soot. Soot, he flew across the moor with me, and Captain, he ran as if the hounds had been after him. They both felt the same as I did." Neither of the creatures looked as if they were the least afraid of Mary. When Dickon began to walk about, Soot stayed on his shoulder, and Captain trotted quietly close to his side. "See here," said Dickon. "See how there has pushed up, and those and these? Ah, and look at these here." He threw himself upon his knees, and Mary went down beside him. They had come upon a whole clump of crocuses burst into purple and gold. Mary bent her face down and kissed them. "You never kiss a person in that way," she said when she lifted her head. "Flowers are so different." He looked puzzled but smiled. He said, "I've kissed my mother many a time that way when I come in from the moor after a day's roaming, and she stood there at the door in the sun looking so glad and comfortable." They ran from one part of the garden to another and found so many wonders that they were obliged to remind themselves that they must whisper or speak low. He showed her the swelling leaf buds on rose branches, which had seemed dead. He showed her 10,000 new green points pushing through the mold. They put their eager young noses close to the earth and sniffed its warm springtime breathing. They dug and pulled and laughed low with rapture until Mistress Mary's hair was tumbled as Dickon's, and her cheeks were almost as poppy red as his. Okay, here's a picture from the story. So this is Mary and Dickon, and there's the crow, and the fox is in his lap. And they're looking at all the things growing up out of the earth. There was every joy on earth in the secret garden that morning, and in the midst of them all came a delight more delightful than them all, because it was more wonderful. Swiftly, something flew across the wall and darted through the trees to a close-grown corner. What do you think it is? A little flare of red-breasted bird with something hanging from its beak. Dickon stood quite still and put his hand... Well, that's what's in his beak, but do you know what kind of bird it is? It's a red-breasted bird. Let's see. So Dickon stood quite still and put his hand on Mary, almost as if they'd suddenly found themselves laughing in a church. "We mustn't stir," he whispered in broad Yorkshire. "We mustn't scarce breathe. I knowed he was mate hunting when I seen him last. It's Ben Weatherstaff's robin. He's building his nest. He'll stay here if we don't fight him." They settled down softly upon the grass and sat there without moving. "He mustn't seem as if we were watching him too close," said Dickon. "He'll be out with us for good if he gets the notion that we're interfering now. He'll be a good bit different till this is over. He's setting up housekeeping. He'll be shyer and readier to take things ill. He's got no time for visiting and gossiping. Us must keep still a tiny little bit and try and look as if we was grass and trees and bushes. Then, when he's got used to seeing us, I'll chirp a bit and he'll know we're not in his way." Mistress Mary was not at all sure she knew, as Dickon seemed to, but tried to look like grass and trees and bushes. He had said the queer thing as if it were the simplest and most natural thing in the world, and she felt it must be quite easy to him. Indeed, she watched for a few minutes carefully, wondering if it was possible for him to quietly turn green and put out branches and leaves. But he only sat wonderfully still, and when he spoke, his voice dropped to such a softness that it was curious she could hear him, but she could. "It's part of the springtime, the nest building is," he said. "I warrant it's going on in the same way every year since the world has begun. They've got their way of thinking and doing things, and a body had better not meddle. You can lose a friend in springtime easier than any other season if you're too curious." "If we talk to him, I can't help but look at him," Mary said as softly as possible. "We must talk of something else. There's something I want to tell you." "He'd like it better if us talks of something else," said Dickon. "What have you got to tell me?" "Well, do you know about Colin?" she whispered. He turned his head to look at her. "What does I know about him?" he asked. "I've seen him. I have been to talk to him every day this week. He wants me to come. He says I'm making him forget about being ill and dying," answered Mary. Dickon looked actually relieved as soon as the surprise died away from his round face. "I am glad of that," he exclaimed. "I am right down glad. It makes me easier. I knowed I must say nothing about him, and I don't like having to hide things." "Don't you like hiding in the garden?" asked Mary. "I'll never tell about it," he answered. "But I says to Mother, 'Mother,' I says, 'I got a secret to keep. It's not a bad one, you knows that, but it's no worse than hiding where a bird's nest is. That doesn't mind, does that?'" Mary always wanted to hear about his mother.
They don't have good grammar.
Well, it's not that they don't have good grammar. They're speaking in a different tongue called Yorkshire, which is very common in England. And so, but it's very hard to understand, and it's very hard for your mother to read it. That is true.
Wait. Are they from Yorkshire?
Yes, they're in England. But Mary's not. Mary's from India, and she learned in like British schools, so she has a very formal language. But Dickon grew up like in the country, so he has a less formal. No. She's British. She just lived in India when her parents lived there. Okay, let's keep going. Mary always wanted to hear about Mother. "What did she say?" she asked, not at all afraid to hear. Dickon grinned sweet-temperedly. "It was just like her what she said," he answered. "She give my head a bit of rub and laughed and says, 'Lad, thou can have all the secrets the likes. I know thee 12 years.'" "How did you know about Colin?" asked Mary. "Everybody as knowed about Master Craven knowed there was a little lad who was like to be a cripple, and knowed Mr. Craven didn't like him to be talked about. Folks is sorry for Mr. Craven because Mrs. Craven was such a pretty young lady, and they was so fond of each other. Mrs. Medlock stops in our cottage whenever she goes to Thwaite, and she doesn't mind talking to Mother before us children because she knows she has brought us up to be trusty. How did thou find out about him?" Martha was in a fine trouble the last time she came home. She said that she'd heard him fretting and that was asking questions, and she didn't know what to say. Mary told him her story about the midnight withering of the wind which had wakened her, and about the faint far-off sounds and the complaining voice which had led her down the dark corridors with her candle, and it ended with her opening the door of the dimly lighted room with the carven four-poster bed in the corner. When she described the small ivory white face and the strange black-rimmed eyes, Dickon shook his head. "Them's just like his mother's eyes, only hers was always laughing, they say," he said. They say Mr. Craven can't bear to see him when he's awake, and it's because his eyes are so much like his mother's and yet so different in his miserable bit of face. Do you think he wants to die? Whispered Mary. No, but he wishes he'd never been born, Mother, she says, and that's the worst thing on earth for a child. Them as is not wantin' to scarce ever thrives. Master Craven says he'd buy anything his money could buy for the poor lad, but he'd like to forget he's on earth. For one thing, he's afraid he'll look at him someday and he'll find he's grown hunchback. Colin's so afraid of it himself that he, like when your back is kind of curved up rather than being straight.
Why?
Well, because the dad has a hunchback, and so I guess they're afraid that the son will have a hunchback too.
Wait, is the dude that's
the child, Colin?
Wait, it's a kid?
Yeah, Colin's a child, and Mr. Craven's his dad.
Oh, I thought it was like a dude.
Well, they are boys, but it's not a dude. This was written back in the 1800s. There were no dudes in the 1800s, Ben. Okay, can I keep reading, please?
Yes.
Great. Let's keep going, friends. Okay, Colin's so afraid of it himself, he won't sit up, says Mary. He's always thinking that if he should feel a lump coming, he should go crazy and scream himself to death. He oughtn't lie there thinking things like that, said Dickon. No lad could get as well through, no lad could get well as that, them sort of things. Holy smokes, it's so hard to read this. The fox was lying on the grass close by, looking up and asking for a pat now and then, and Dickon bent down and rubbed his neck softly and thought a few minutes in silence. Presently, he lifted his head and looked around the garden. When we first got it here, I need you to stop because you're shaking me, and that makes it really hard to read. Yes, so please stop. Presently, he lifted his head and looked around the garden. When we first got in here, he said, it seemed like everything was gray. Look around now and tell me if that doesn't see a difference. Mary looked and caught her breath a little. Why, she cried, the gray wall is changing. It's as if a green mist were creeping over it. It's almost like a green gauzed veil. Aye, said Dickon, and it'll be greener and greener till all the gray's gone. Can thou guess what I was thinking? I know it was something nice, said Mary eagerly. I believe it was something about Colin. I was thinking that if he was out here, he wouldn't be watching for lumps to grow on his back. He'd be watching for buds to break out of the rose bushes, and he'd likely be healthier, explained Dickon. I was wondering if us could ever get him in the humor to come out here and lie under the trees in his carriage. I've been wondering that myself. I've thought of it almost every time since I've talked to him, said Mary. I wondered if he could keep a secret, and I've wondered if we could bring him here without anyone seeing us. I thought perhaps you could push his carriage. The doctor said he must have fresh air, and if he wants us to take him out, no one dare disobey him. He won't go out for other people, and perhaps they'll be glad if he'll go out with us. He could order the gardeners to keep away so they wouldn't find out. Dickon was thinking very hard as he scratched Captain's back. It'd be good for him, I warrant, he said. Us'd not be thinking he'd better never been born. Us'd just be two children watching a garden grow, and he be another. Two lads and a little lass just looking out at the springtime. I warrant it'd be better than the doctor's stuff. He's been lying in his room so long, and he's always been so afraid of his back that it's made him quite queer, she said. He knows a good many things out of books, but he doesn't know anything else. He says that he's been too ill to notice things, and he hates going out of doors and hates gardens and gardeners. But he likes to hear about the garden because it's a secret. I daren't tell him, but he says he wants to see it. Us'll have to take him out here sometime for sure, said Dickon. I could push his carriage well enough. Has you noticed how the robin and his mate has been working while we've been sitting here? Look at him perched on that branch, wondering where it'd be best to put that twig he's got in his beak. He made one of his low whistling calls, and the robin turned his head and looked at him inquiringly, still holding his twig. Dickon spoke to him as Ben Weatherstaff did, but Dickon's tone was one of friendly advice. Wherever thou puts it, he said, it'll be all right. Thou knew how to build the nest before they came out of the egg. Get on with thee, lad. Thou's got no time to lose. Oh, I do like to hear you talk to him, Mary said, laughing delightedly. Ben Weatherstaff scolds him and makes fun of him, and he hops along about and looks as though he understands every word, but I know he likes it. Ben Weatherstaff says he's so conceited he would rather have stones thrown at him than not be noticed. Dickon laughed too and went on talking. Thy nose won't trouble thee, he says to the robin. Us is being near wild things ourselves. Us is nest building too, bless thee. Look out, thou doesn't tell on us. And though the robin did not answer because his beak was occupied, Mary knew that when he flew away with his twig to his own corner of the garden in the darkness of his dew-eyed bright eye meant that he would not tell their secret for the world. And that's the end of the chapter. All right, so tomorrow, hopefully, we're going to read again, chapter 16. It's called I Won't, Said Mary. So I hope that we will see you then. Take care, friends. Bye.